This is the biggest factor when making an offer on a property. It's not the days on market or the price, it's actually the age and life stage of the other party. Let's dive in and we'll tell you why.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because real estate really does come down to the psychology of the seller from a buyer's perspective, right? And the generation and age and where that person is in their life makes all the difference on what they're looking for in the offer.
Yeah, and it could be like the same house, the same market, and you have, a younger generation looking at it, and then you have somebody like a baby boomer generation looking at it. They're going to like that house for different reasons. They're going to have different motivations for purchasing or selling. So we wanted to dive into that today.
Yeah, I just had a buyer get a great deal, right? It was a 1031, and this house was priced to sell. We made an offer on it, and it was accepted. And the truth is we find out that this woman, her husband just died. She's moving to like I don't know if it's like assisted living, but like a 55 and up, apartment community. And her biggest thing was they bought it for 125,000, selling it for 500. She was super happy with that, and she just wanted out ASAP. Like that was her motivation. Like that was it. She didn't want to she could have probably got 50 more grand, but she didn't want it to sit.
Yeah, and I think that's something to notice or take note of for the silent generation or even the baby boomers, depending on their age. One thing that I've had my buyers take a look at when they're making an offer for an older, especially, the silent generation or baby boomer generation is, hey, you can leave anything in the property you do not want. I don't care if it's junk. I want you to be able to hit the easy button and move on to your next steps. And a lot of times that's worth more than an extra $5,000 to or $10,000 to some of these sellers because they don't have help. Their family lives far away. They just want the easy button to take the next step. So
I
it's
love
something
that.
to think about.
I've never even thought of that, but that's a really good point. Like, one of the
Yeah.
biggest struggles if somebody's been in a house forever is getting out all the stuff that they don't want. And us young people are like, Danille, you would just go online, hire a company or find a contractor off of, some app. It's like, if you're like 75, 80 years old, like you don't know how to do that most likely. And B, you don't want to. And money sometimes at those later stages, especially right now with the boomers, the one thing they have is money. You know what I mean? Like they don't have a lot of technological advancement, but they might not need 5 extra more grand. It might not really mean anything to them. Like you said, as much as just that ease of like, you're done. Just get your stuff out you want. We'll handle it all for you,
Well, and oftentimes, paying for a dumpster and to get trash removed, maybe it's your time and $1,000 for the dumpster, but to them it would be inconveniencing family, inconveniencing friends. They can't lift and throw the stuff away, like whatever it is. So it really is a good thing to consider if you're making offer on an older owner. And older owners are tied to some of their possessions less than the younger generations, and that's not bad. It's just a difference. So sometimes if they do have strong emotional ties, it's just good that they can walk away because otherwise they're going to take forever to move too.
And the other thing that I've noticed with older owners is, especially if they live there and you're like a young first time home buyer, like this is your first house, like writing that letter and submitting it with your offer really does pull on heartstrings for a lot of those people because this is their home. They love it so much. And you and your family, it's your first home. And like they're really excited for you about that. And I actually got my first condo that way. It was my first home. And I had written a letter to her and she got offers that were 3 or 4 grand more, but she picked mine because, and she, had me over for coffee, like right before we closed. Like it was a very intimate experience for her. And she was in her 80s. And she was moving back to Canada because she couldn't live alone anymore. And it's just, that really can go a long way as well.
And I think that those strong emotional ties or that connection is things that those generations are used to. Our younger generation, everybody is on their phone or on social media. And the older generations, they value that coffee meeting or that, emotional tie of, oh, the next person is going to enjoy my house as much as I did. It's very important for them. So You don't
Right.
want to lie about it, but if that's
No.
really the case, then make it known, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's different when you're like, say you're a family that's, in your 30s and you're buying a house from another family in their 30s, right? Like they're in that growth phase. Like they need that extra 5 grand. Like, they're
Yeah.
obviously not every time you could try it, but a lot of the time they're looking for, the best price because they have to move on with their lives. When you're older, like if you don't really need the money, like, you know what I mean? It's just more like, wow, I feel really good that, these people are buying this place. You know what I mean? And even for me, like I sold my condo last year and the couple that bought it were first time homeowners with a baby. So like it was the same condo that the lady had, let me buy. And then I let them know in a letter the backstory. And, it's not why I accepted their offer. It was the only offer I had, but it was more just like, they did this for me and I hope that you really enjoy it like I have. And I left them like a nice bottle of wine and some wine glasses to celebrate, because like it really like it's always worth it, I think, anyways. But that older generation or people that don't necessarily need the money are going to have their heartstrings pulled on that more.
And I love that because so oftentimes real estate's all about the numbers, but that just brings like the humanity into it because at the end of the day, it's a home that somebody's going to live there and raise their babies or get married in, or you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it is really fun and brings meaning to the work that we do, which I love.
Yeah, and I think too, like you had put on here, like somebody that you trust, right? And I think that that's a big one as well. Like presenting a good offer, letting the seller know you're going to do an inspection, but you're not going to nickel and dime them. Like they don't need that extra stress. They want to feel
Yeah.
comfortable moving forward because a lot of times, I mean, to be honest, men die before women. So these are older women that their husband died, the same exact situation that, happened. And
Mhm.
they don't really understand a lot of things because they, especially from that generation, they a lot of times they were stay at home and they weren't really involved in the financials. So it's really
Yeah.
easier for them for, if you're like, I'm not going to nickel and dime you, this is going to be super easy. And you can
Yeah.
convey that to their realtor. Like everything that you are going to convey, you can write a note, but you also really need to convey through their realtor that you're going to make this really easy for them.
And I think that it goes for certainty, that piece of certainty over maximizing the price. Like you said, no inspection or minimizing the inspection requests. Maybe the price is a little bit lower, but all of the other factors that you would have done in a different offer are just the easy button. It's clear, concise, easy to understand. Because to your point, a lot of wives of those older generations didn't have to do those decisions. They're not maybe as savvy as some in the younger generations. So that's a really great point to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And then, so let's move into the baby boomers. The baby boomers right now have a lot of the cash. They own a
Oh
lot of the
yeah.
properties. It's like our parents' generation, right? They like want to make sure they're getting maximum value because they're not at that point yet. They're thinking about their retirement. But at the same time, they have a lot of equity because they've owned these homes for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And they've seen a lot of higher inflation, multiple recessions. They've been through the real estate cycle numerous times. So they come with a different perspective than some of the younger generations.
Yeah, they're like, I always say they're wheeling and dealing, right? Like, I just think
Yep.
of like, they kind of hold all the cards right now. But they also, I also do think that you have to make your offer. It's not always about price, like everyone's like, oh, they want max price, but that's not necessarily it. So right now, I'm playing on the fact that 20% of deals are falling out of contract over the
Mm-hmm.
inspection. So big words for me right now when I'm dealing with this type of generational client is we're not going to nickel and dime the inspection. If there's big issues, we're going to address it, but we're not going to have you, fix the scuffs on the wall for $300. We're going to eat that
Yeah.
stuff for a better deal. But the other thing
Yeah.
I'm doing is I'm shortening the inspection period because you really like in Arizona, I don't know about where you're at. We have a 10-day inspection window. Is that the same for you?
It varies, but we can either do anything from 5 to 10. I would say 7 to 10 is normal, but to make offers more competitive, we do shorten that here too.
So that's what I was going to say. Like with these people that are like, with 20% of deals falling out, and what sucks when a deal falls out right now for a seller is that at least in Arizona, you have that 10-day inspection period and it falls out on day 11. So what that does is it takes the home off the market for 10 days. And So what we're doing right now is I'm doing a 5-day inspection period, and that's plenty of time. You can always ask for an extension. Like if you find something crazy, you can always say, hey, we need to extend the inspection period. And typically that will get approved because we, found out there's an issue with the roof or whatever. So you're not really losing anything. You're still doing an inspection. You're just having to hurry it a little bit and get it scheduled. But what it does for that seller is it's like, okay, if this falls through, it's only going to be under for 5 days versus 10. Yeah. And, it just makes your offer more appealing, especially if you're coming in with a lower offer.
Yeah, and then you can say, hey, take a backup offer or something along those lines if there's ones that is close. Because with the 10-day time, they might find another house in that time. But if you keep it shorter at 5, then you have a better opportunity, or, it gives you a little bit of an edge up on another offer. So
yeah, and you have to look, looking at the purchase price, especially in this generation, is so important because it's important in every generation. But this one, they have a lot of equity, right? So for example, even on the example I just used, she bought the property for like 125, 150. She's selling it for 500. Okay. So if you make a lower offer, they're still getting a bunch of money versus, we bought it for 475. Obviously, they're not going to lower it below that, right? Or want to. So you have to look at that and realize how much equity they have. And to your point, once again, making it more of a sure deal. I think that is the thing right now because buyers are so jumpy. Making it seem like, listen, we're not going to nickel and dime you. We're going to get this done quick. I still need to get a loan if you don't have cash. But as far as that inspection period with the earnest money, and you can even say, I even did this on one deal, after the inspection period, we'll go hard on $2,000. You know what I mean? Meaning if you back out for any reason, they get your earnest money plus two additional $1,000, right? And if you're not planning on backing out, it's a good deal for your buyer to do that. But you're also giving that, we're not messing around. We're not trying to put you under contract and then, back out. You just have to get through this inspection period. And then if we do back out, you get some money.
Yeah. Well, I think the other piece with the baby boomer generation is if they're downsizing or moving from a multi-level or split entry to, their next step, maybe it's a patio home or a senior living. Sometimes negotiating the timeline on closing is going to be way more important. If they're building a new house and it's not going to be ready for a couple of months yet, say, hey, okay, we'll close now so you have your funds if you need them, but we'll delay possession or we'll delay closing to give them what they want, because it's not always about the money. Sometimes it's about time or convenience or storing things in the shed, what we have at farms out here, where it's a lot of equipment to get rid of, where the time at the property is way more important than the final dollar. The other thing that's really important to think about is if they have income. We're getting close to the end of the year. So a lot of times I will ask my sellers, hey, is it important if we close in 2025, or do you want to close first week of January 2026? Because a lot of times they'll know where they're at for tax purposes. And sometimes 2 offers identically in price, but one closes this year, one closes next year. That makes a huge difference on their bottom line too. So really paying attention to all of that is huge when it comes down to it.
It's a good point. And here's the thing, when you're a buyer, you're relying on your realtor, which is really important because you can't really call and talk to the seller or the seller's agent, right? So you really need to have someone that's going to advocate these things. And they're really good questions. I always know exactly who the seller is, exactly what's important to them, and exactly what their pain points are. And I actually do this before I make the offer. I'll talk to my buyer about an offer and we'll kind of discuss it and we'll come up with a plan. But then I call the listing agent and I'm like, tell me about your buyer. Tell me what's important to them. Tell me their pain points. What's going on? And sometimes if our deal doesn't align with what they just told me, I call back my buyer and I say, listen, I think we should edit this and this and this because this is what's important to them. Because everyone thinks it's just price and it's not. Sometimes it is, but sometimes, especially with these older generations, it's things other than that. Because to your point, if they're moving and they don't have identified where they're going yet, because in this market now, a lot of people don't, because homes are sitting longer. So there's not a lot of contingencies, there's not a lot of I already bought something, everything's kind of contingent and people aren't sure if their house is going to sell or how long. So then
Yeah.
they can get some time to regroup in their home and not have to go find an Airbnb and go find this. And once again, you young people are like, well, why don't you just go get an Airbnb for 2 months? That's so easy. It's like, I think of my dad, right? He doesn't want anyone on either side of him. He knows all his neighbors. He has so much crap in the house. Like, what's he going to do with it? Like, he's not going to go rent a storage unit. It's so much more difficult than saying, do you want to delay, do you want a 60-day close, or do you want to close right away? And then you guys pay me a little bit of rent money on the back end and then call it a day, right? Like, so those things are like, could be so important. And that younger generation just doesn't see it because they just see their world.
Yep. Which brings us to Gen X. So they know all too well the crash of 2008-9. Many of the Generation X were like, it was their prime earning years. So it really makes a difference in how they view and see things and how they make offers or how they purchase. They're maybe come with a little more skepticism than some of the older or, the millennial generation. They do a lot of research online. So the days on market, the price per square foot, you see them being a little bit more analytical than some of the younger generation seeing, a cute Instagram post and be like, I want to go see that house.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at things with a finer tooth comb, which is a good thing.
It is a good thing. Exactly. And you just need to understand, from that perspective, they're going to push back on you with a lot of data. Or not really on you, but they might decline your offer with a lot of data. So that's why you need to come in and really, support your offer, right? And sometimes, you don't want to be arrogant, but depending on the listing agent you're dealing with, some of them are like a friend's friend that does this part-time or my sister or whatever. And you kind of have to guide them through and help them like, hey, we're basing our offer on like these comparables. And just so they're aware, so they can take it back to their seller and say, okay, well, it's less than we wanted, but if you look at the data in the last 3 months, this is kind of what things are selling for. And that's what an agent's job is just in general to do. But not every agent does that or has, especially if they're a part-time agent, has the, knowledge to do that. So that kind of just helps us sell them on their offer.
Yeah. And I think even if the listing agent has told their seller clients that, sometimes coming from the buyer's agent and the buyer's agent doing that little bit of extra work goes a long way because then they're hearing it from an outside voice. They have a bona fide offer in their hand. And, sometimes I'll have buyers say, oh, I don't want to lowball. I don't want to offend the seller, but they're making a decent offer for what we feel the market is bearing. Then I say, you know what? These sellers can't say no to an offer they don't have. They can always counter offer. Let's submit the comparables that we're looking at to justify why we're offering what we're offering. The sellers can always say no, but they might surprise us. Maybe it's they had a bad week or they had a repair to make and they were ready to just get rid of it. So it is worth it to include that extra information along with the offer, especially depending on the situation.
Absolutely. It totally is. And you can get creative around this kind of stuff as well. Like I just had a deal this weekend that went under contract where they offered less than the seller wanted to take, but they wanted her furniture and they were willing to pay more for the furniture than she thought that it was worth, so it just kind of all panned out, right? So it wasn't just a price thing. I mean, it was, but it wasn't, it was like you can get creative too with some of that stuff because they knew that my seller just got married. They knew that she was moving in with her now husband and that she didn't need any of the stuff. And they were like, well, maybe we just take the stuff and then with the house, make her life easier. And voila, it kind of worked out. But you got to get creative with these offers. And you can never assume that your offer is offensive. Like I don't like it when realtors do that. And I've had realtors do that to me. Like, oh, you can't make that offer. It's offensive. It's like, they can counter, and if they're so offended that they won't even counter, you can still make another offer that's better. And if they're going to take it, they're going to take it. Like, back when it was a full seller's market, you could offend a seller and you could get blackballed because they had 8 other buyers sitting there, right? However, now there's not that many buyers. So like, they're not gonna, they can be offended all they want, but at the end of the day, they might take it. And at the end of the day, if they don't, you can always resubmit another offer, even if they don't counter.
And that's what I've actually got going on right now. Granted, it's more of a commercial deal, but pricing and generational and motivations aside, they made an offer. These buyers made an offer. The seller is, towards retirement age. And originally he said, nope, not going to look at it. Fast forward 3 months, these buyers are now making an offer that's within $5,000 of their original offer, and the sellers are thinking really, really hard about it.
Yeah.
So had they just taken the original offer, they would have had, less insurance, less taxes, carrying costs for the last how many months. But here we are, fast forward 3 more months of expenses, and they're literally back almost identical to day one on the offer. And sometimes the first offer out of the gate is the best. Like, don't discard it or just brush it off. Really dig into it, because there's probably a reason why somebody's making an offer where they're at. Not saying you have to take it, but
yeah, but you should consider it. Yeah, you should look at it. And I agree with that. Like, I'll make an offer and, it'll be declined. And my buyers will say, okay, like, that one's off the list. And I'm like, no. We're still going to follow that listing, and we're going to let it sit for 30 or 60 more days. And if it then hasn't sold, we can reach out with the same offer, or even maybe a lower offer, depending on the situation. And they might just take it, or slightly higher, maybe, like, whatever the situation is. But you don't just brush it off just because your offer got declined. I'm like, no. That's just like starting phase one, right? Especially if it's vacant. Like, especially if it's vacant. If they're living there, it's like, okay, maybe they have this hard line or whatever. If it's vacant, to your point, insurance, HOAs, maintenance, like nobody living there. So the stress of that, right? Like, and they're going to be sitting there, in the same position 60 days later thinking, God, should I just take this, right now? Like, don't brush that off.
No. And especially if you liked it enough to make the offer the first time, then why completely cross it off the list? Like you said, monitor it, watch it, like, take note and pay attention, because that might be the one you end up liking the best anyways.
And don't get your butt hurt, because I have a lot of buyers like, oh, if they're not going to take my offer, like, whatever, like, I'm not going to, I don't want to deal with them. And I'm like, no, this is not like a game. Like, they didn't take your offer. That's fine. Remake the same offer and see if they take it. Don't get your feelings hurt. This is like a big financial decision for both parties. And you could get a really good deal from this situation.
Exactly. Which brings us to millennials.
They're different. That's our generation, right? That's your generation, right? Me too. Okay.
Yep.
So they all delayed home ownership because of 2008, which I graduated in 2007. So I know all about that. And then also, the student loan debt has really exploded, which has put them behind.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of more decision making surrounding a lifestyle, flexibility. I want to go on vacation, or I'm fine with a month-to-month lease. They want to have flexibility, especially with all of the work from home type jobs. And, they're a little bit more whimsical and fairy tale, is kind of what I feel.
Yeah, and depending where they are, right? Like, I find that if they're more family oriented, they're a little bit more analytical. But yet, if they're still single or they're married but they don't have any kids, then they're more, like you said, they want flexibility. They want to be in certain parts of town. Like, location's really important to them. And obviously, so is that monthly price, because they can only pay what they can pay.
Yeah, and I think that the millennial generation has been okay with smaller footprints. Like, that's when we saw homes being built that started to get smaller for the first time in decades. I think that location and transparency, location and proximity to family or even restaurants, vibe downtown, that's more important to them than having a big sprawling square footage of a house. So there's just way two totally different things when they look at that. And then, like you mentioned, the monthly payment, over the overall purchase price. It's like, can I afford this or not?
And I find too with millennials, a lot of them, the sellers at least, they're trying to, they're having a family. So now instead of a condo, they want a single family home, or instead of a 3-bedroom, they need a 4 or 5 bedroom. They're really, so there's that pressure that they're under, that quick close a lot of times is kind of what they're looking for, right? And price and quick close, because they're in this family building stage, and, they need more space, so those sellers are probably the least motivated, in my opinion, right now, because they have this low rate. And if they're still living there, they really want to get the price they want to get, because this house they want to move into with now a higher rate, they need to put a decent amount down to. And I think that these are the ones that they're delisting. They're not taking low offers. They just can't, because their only reason for selling a lot of the time is to upsize for their family, and they can't afford to upsize for their family unless they get X amount for the property. Period. Yeah. You know, and they're the hardest ones when it comes to negotiations, you know, and that's kind of where you might be able to get this value out of, what if you leave the furniture? You know, what if you do this? Like what if I give you full price or close to full price, but you leave all your furniture if it's nice, right? And they might consider that, because yes, they have to buy new furniture, but they're getting a new space, so they might want to do that anyways, right? And so like the price I find on this millennials price is just the biggest marker right now.
Yeah, and I think on the buying side of things, I think they've had a higher risk tolerance, and you know, really, depending on the age of the millennial, it just really depends on what their goal is. Like if their family, because there's some millennials that have families, but there's some that are still like, you know, the single, it's just me, YOLO type vibes, where it's like, okay, you know, it depends on where they're at in that cohort, and it depends on the age of the person that has the listing of the house that they want.
The other thing with millennials that I'm seeing on the buy side is they're my generation that I have the hardest time with right now, as far as getting them to buy a house, because we lived through 08. So they're the generation that's very much like, I want to wait till the market crashes. I want to wait till things go back down. I want it, because we lived through that. Like most of us weren't old enough to really have money to buy anything, unfortunately. That was like Gen X, but we lived through it. We saw prices plummet. But what they don't realize is like the fundamentals really aren't there though for that to happen. But they have the most, like I had a couple I was working with, and I really wanted them to buy last year. Like last spring for our market was like the slowest of slow. We were seeing 3% concessions. It was just a great time to buy. And they waited because they thought, okay, 3%, I can't wait till it crashes. And then now the market is much busier. We're not seeing concessions on most deals. And they even said that to me, like, we should have bought in the spring. And I'm like, yeah, but they just had this feeling that their biggest fear, I think, millennials, is if they buy something and things crash down. That's the hurdle I'm on my buying side have to try to overcome.
Yeah, and I think they're balancing like the fear of overpaying with the fear of missing out, and they're a little bit unsure, you know, because they were coming into age at that 2008 timeline, you know, whether they're on the front end of that or the back end of that, that's fresh in their minds, you know, as they're making these financial decisions. Or they might have seen their parents, you know, with a fallout, or seen some struggles during that time with their parents, depending on the age of the millennial.
Absolutely. And also depending on the age of the millennial, I think a big thing is that I missed out. Like I should have bought in 2019 or before. I missed out. So now I need to wait till the cycle recycles and everything crashes down to kind of jump on that bandwagon. And the problem is like, that's just not. 08 was like an anomaly. You know what? I'm not going to say it could never happen again, but how much more does the market have to go up for it then to correct above? You know what I mean? So, you know, it is. It's a generation. I think on the selling side, they're money motivated. And on the buying side, for me at least, and our price points are more than yours, but they're hesitant. And they're also taking on a very big, you know, these are a lot of first time home buyers. So in Arizona, at least, and they're taking on a big mortgage payment without much to back it up. Like at least on your previous owners that are selling and then buying something else, they had that equity that they built. The millennials now are coming in with no equity. So they're just paying straight cash at these elevated prices, and they're pushing the limits of what they're comfortable paying.
Yeah. And some of them are happy to do that, but some come with a lot more skepticism, which brings us to Gen Z.
Well, Gen Z in Arizona is not buying. Like they're just not there yet. You know, really.
You know, we see some here just because our rent price point compared to our entry level homes, you know, you can still get a decent home for less than $100,000 here, which is crazy. I mean, it's going to be in a small rural community. It's going to be a smaller house, but it's still, something that I would feel comfortable living in. So you compare that payment on a 30-year mortgage for $100,000 house with a rental payment, and you're neck and neck. So if you have a little bit in savings to have, for a down payment, then people are buying. So what we've seen is the price point of these lower priced homes have gone up. The competition for the low end is really high, especially if it's something that you can move into and, do a few things to make it look prettier or whatever, cosmetic updates. They're there.
Yeah, and we see that too. We see it more in millennials, like that 450, 500 is kind of our entry level. And we do see that, maybe 3 something for a condo, but we do see that too.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of competition for that because it's such a lower price point. But I would say, with the Gen Z buyer, what would be important to them is that flexibility, and so for my younger buyers, I guess I've had some high end of Gen Z buyers. It's all about, if you don't want to live here anymore, you can turn it into a rental. You can Airbnb it. You can, what can you do with it?
Yeah.
If you move jobs, if you get married, if that kind of thing. And to me, that's really helpful for them. So when they buy, I'm like, okay, you want to buy something that's a good rental. So you need to think of it that way, because you told me you only want to live here for 3 or 4 years. And I told you shouldn't sell it. You know what I mean? So, or plan on selling it at least. So it's just a different conversation than I would have with a millennial with a family, or like a baby boomer that's downsizing.
Yeah. And I wonder what drives that. I think part of it is all of these, Gen Zers are on, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, and they're watching all of these, influencers, so to speak, real estate experts, which is great. Like, that's how you learn. Mm-hmm. And so they're learning to ask some of these questions ahead of time. I mean, even in our rural markets, I'm seeing it, young couples or younger married couples in their 20s are like, okay, well, I think I'm going to turn this into a rental after a couple of years. And it's like, I love that. It's great to see that. Let's talk about the pros and cons if you turn this into a rental. For a renter, this floor plan would work or it wouldn't, you'll kind of go through some of the factors for that. But it's awesome. I love the questions and the enthusiasm that they come with. They are fast paced. They expect responses right then and there, which is good, but it's like, hang on, I'm showing a house. I'll be done in 20 minutes and I'll call you, but it's just the fast paced, world, instant gratification world that they've lived in. So it is always interesting the way that you talk or communicate with a Gen Zer versus, a baby boomer. And so
it is. And I think the biggest thing is you need to understand who you're buying the house from, because a house purchase is a negotiation 100%. And you need to know who you're negotiating with. And, if you're a younger buyer, I always think that, and I was telling my buyer this weekend, I go, I want you to buy like an investor. Like, I know you're a first time home buyer, but I want you to buy like an investor. And part of that is finding a realtor that understands to figure out the full profile of the seller so that you can make the best offer, because investors do it all the time. Investors, they want to know pain points. Like, we've brought up a lot of them right now. They want to, execute those pain points, where a normal buyer, they just make an offer. Like, this is all I can afford, take it or leave it. And they don't sweeten the pot in any kind of way, shape, or form, nor do they know the situation of the person that's selling it. And you don't always, like, sometimes the listing agent doesn't tell you much, right? So there is times where, like, I try to get information from a listing agent and they're like, listen, just send me the offer. Like, I don't know why I'm not going to give away any information, right? And that does happen. But most of the time, you can find out a lot of things from the seller about the seller if you just ask. And I think you just have to think of it like it's totally a psychology game. Like, an offer on a real estate, it's completely psychological. Like, even my seller this weekend, so we went under contract and they sent over an offer and she was super excited about it. And it was like a, Sunday night, and she's like, let's get back to them tonight so that they don't cancel it in the morning, and I said, well, they can cancel it for 10 days, like, no matter what. So we actually are going to wait till tomorrow afternoon because I want them to sit on it a little bit and really start to want it. Like, are they going to accept it? Like, God, we really liked that house. Like, we don't want to seem too eager, even though you are. And we
Yep.
want them, that feeling as like a buyer where you're like, I don't know if they're going to accept it. I don't know if they're going to counter. I don't
Yeah.
know if they have another offer. Like so much is running through your head and you want to let them sit in that a little bit, because that makes
Yep.
them want the
Yep.
house more.
Yeah, it does. Or it's like, did another offer come in? Are they entertaining another offer?
Yep.
Sometimes it happens, just that's the way that buyers think. So sometimes, some, it works to your favor.
It does, it really does. And that's part of your responsibility as a real estate agent is playing the psychology on both sides of the deal. Like for me, like I said, for sellers right now, I know their pain point is 20% offers are falling through because they're getting nickel and dimed. So my big thing with my buyers is like, let's put in an offer where you're not going to nickel and dime the inspection because that is a very strong thing for us to say with the offer right now.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, the biggest thing that's overlooked, like we're talking about, is not the price. It's the generation you come from because they all price homes differently. They negotiate differently. So using that to your advantage, interpreting risks differently and what's important to, a seller of a baby boomer generation is going to be different than the millennial generation. So everything is all analyzed differently based upon your life stage or your generation. So I think it's really important that buyers pay attention to that, especially when they're offering, on a listing.
Absolutely. So we hope this was helpful for you guys, and we will see you next week.